understanding of federal and state constitutional relationship and defect liability period.
My name is Muhammad Aiman.
My name is Imran.
Me is Zuhairi.
The name Ahmad Damai. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ahmad Damai bin Azhar, and today I will be presenting about the federal and state constitutional relationship. So let's start with first one, background of the study. Nominally, Malaysia practices a Westminster parliamentary democracy with an elected lower house and a nominated upper house. Apart from the federal constitution, every state in Malaysia also has its own state constitution, known as the state constitution. Um, and each state has their own authority within their respective state. So this is the summary of background study. Next is problem statement. Malaysia federal system has often been described as highly centralized. While Malaysia has at times experienced strong centralization, the current trajectory hints at a renewed emphasis on a decentralized power and subsidiarity, letting decisions close to the people be made by local authorities rather than always by the center. Another issue is that constitutional supremacy is not only theoretical, but also affects real legal disputes. And next, our objective, there are three. First is to identify the relationship between the federal constitution and the state constitution in Malaysia. Second, to identify the similarities and difference between the powers and responsibility of the federal and state government in Malaysia. And the third one, to discuss the issue of power division, state autonomy, and constitutional supremacy in Malaysia. So that's all from me. I will leave the next slide to my friend. Thank you.
The Federal Constitution of Malaysia. Definition and significance. The Federal Constitution of Malaysia is the supreme law of the Federation and serves as the foundation of the country's legal and political system. It was established to provide the framework by defining the powers and responsibilities of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. Federal Constitution established constitutional procedures for election, the formation of government, and the transition of authority. 2. Constitutional supremacy. Constitutional supremacy is a fundamental principle of the Malaysia legal system as provided under Article 4(1) of the Federal Constitution. It specifies that the Federal Constitution is the supreme law of the Federation and serves as the highest legal authority in the country. If any legislation or governmental action conflicts with the Constitution, the courts have the authority to declare it unconstitutional and invalid. 3. Functions of the Federal Constitution. Federal Constitution is important to establish the supreme law of the country, as well as it guarantees the citizen basic rights such as equality before the law, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and personal protection. Federal Constitution is used to specify procedures on how laws are being proposed, debated, approved, and enforced, thus ensuring that legislation is enacted in full transparency and orderly manner.
Now I will explain about the state constitution in Malaysia. First, purpose and legal basis. In Malaysia, state constitutions are considered the most important source of law at the state level, providing the basis for governance in each state. State constitution define the powers and limits of each state government and its institution, including the ruler or Yang di-Pertuan Negeri, the Executive Council, and the State Legislative Assembly. 2. Structure and key provisions. The provisions of state constitutions generally include the powers and the position of head of state, that is Sultan Raja or Yang di-Pertuan Negeri, the establishment of state executive council, as well as the establishment of the state assembly as legislative assembly. Third, relationship with the federal constitution. The state and the federal constitutions have a relationship based on this concept of constitutional supremacy. The federal constitution divides the legislative powers between the federal government and state governments and establish three lists, that is federal list, state list, and concurrent list, regarding legislative powers in the ninth schedule.
Okay, for this slide, explain the definition of power between the federal and state government in Malaysia. Malaysia consists of 13 states and 3 federal territories, and the power of each level of government are clearly divided under the federal constitution. The federal government is responsible for matters that affect the whole country, such as defense, internal security, and foreign affairs. Meanwhile, the state government manage matter within their respective states, including land administration, forestry, local government, Islamic law, and local custom. In addition, Malaysia practice a parliamentary democracy where government power are divided into three branches: executive, legislature, and judiciary. This separation of power exists at both the federal and state level is to ensure effective governance and accountability.
For the state autonomy in Malaysia, the federal and state governments share power according to Malaysia's federal system, whereby the federal government has jurisdiction over national matters and the state have jurisdiction over sub-national matters. The issue regarding state autonomy is important for both the East Malaysia state of Sabah and Sarawak. When Malaysia came into existence on September 16, 1963, both states were to benefit and be protected by the special constitutional protection provided by the Malaysia Agreement 1963, MA 63. As such, the MA 63 also contains provisions for the protection of rights and interests and the enhancement of autonomy for both Sabah and Sarawak by providing both states with special rights that allow greater controls over matters that affect both territorial sovereignty. The special right provide to both Sabah and Sarawak support and help to encourage ongoing levels of autonomy for both states within the framework of the Federation of Malaysia. And now, for constitutional supremacy and conflict resolution. Constitutional supremacy serves as the basis for Malaysia's federal system and law. According to Clause 1 of Article 4 of Malaysia Constitution, the Constitution is considered by law to be the ultimate legal authority for Malaysia, and thus, the action taken by either legislature or the executive must comply with the Constitution. When there is a conflict between federal and state law, Section 75 states that federal law takes priority over state law, and that any state law that is in conflict with federal law will be void to the extent that they conflict with each other. This provision clarifies how powers will be divided between the national and state governments in Malaysia federal system. Courts can interpret the constitution, determine whether laws are valid, review whether action taken by public authorities are constitutional, and settle dispute between the federal government and the state.
Okay, this slide highlight the similarities and difference between federal and state governments in Malaysia. Firstly, both governments derive their power from the federal constitution and are responsible for ensuring that all laws are implemented according to the constitution. In some areas, they also share responsibilities under the concurrent list, such as public health, housing, and social welfare. However, there are important differences. The federal government has authority over national matters, including defense, foreign affairs, finance, and education, while the state government mainly in areas such as land, forestry, and local government. In addition, Sabah and Sarawak have special constitutional power that are not enjoyed by the other state. This include greater authority over matters such as immigration and certain administrative affairs. Overall, although the federal and state government share some responsibility, each has distinct role to ensure that country is governed effectively. That's all.
Okay. In conclusion, the relationship between constitution and state constitution in Malaysia are important part of the federal system of government of the country. In the same way, state constitution form the basis for the administration of each state, including the powers of the ruler and yang di-Pertuan Negeri, the state executive council, and the state legislative assembly. But each state has its own constitution, and it must be consistent within the federal constitution. So this is the end of topic 1. Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Our group second topic is defect and defect liability period. So for the introduction, what are the defects and defect liability period? Building defects are usually described as unsuitable condition that might affect the building's structural integrity, quality, or performance. Building defects can take place when constructing the building or after it has been finished. Building defects are discovered through inspection, followed by appropriate remedies to determining the causes. Defect liability period, or DLP, is the period after the completion of a construction project during which the contractor remains responsible for rectifying any defects, fault, or deficiencies that become apparent in the completed works. The DLP serves as an insurance for the client and ensuring that any defect identified within the specified period are repaired by the contractor. Contract administration are means to ensure that the contract is performed according to the articles of agreement and conditions of contract within the related laws and dramatic practices in the construction industry. In Malaysia, there are several standard forms of contract, namely Pertubuhan Arkitek Malaysia (PAM) and Public Works Department (PWD). For PWD contracts are the traditional forms of contract based on the bills of quantities 203A produced for the use in the public sector of government projects in both building and civil engineering contracts. These are the home-based forms where risks are known to the local industry and it is incorporated with either bills of quantity or schedule of rates. The PAM form is a standard form of contract that has been widely used by private sector construction project in Malaysia. The PAM 1998 form originated from the PAM 1969 form. It was introduced to modernize the contract and address shortcomings that had become apparent through practice and court decision over the years.
Now, in this slide, I will explain what a building defect is and why it is important in construction. A building defect refers to any fault, flaw, or imperfection in a building component that affect its performance, functionality, or quality. This defect can occur due to design error, poor workmanship, the use of low quality material, or failure to comply with construction specification. Some defect can be identified immediately after construction is completed, while others may only appear after the building has been occupied for some time. The building defect can affect different parts of a building, including the foundation, structural frame, and building services. Common examples include water leakage, dampness, crack, and poor finishing work. If these defects are not repaired promptly, they can reduce the building lifespan, increase maintenance costs, and in serious case, pose safety risk to the occupant. Therefore, early detection and proper rectification of defect are essential to ensure the quality, durability, and safety of a building. Next slide. Next, I will explain the defect liability period or DLP for short. The defect liability period is a specific period after a construction project has been completed and handed over to the client. During this period, the contractor remains responsible for repairing any defect caused by poor workmanship or the use of defective material. The DLP begins after the certification of practical completion (CPC) is issued. The main purpose of the DLP is to protect the building owner by ensuring that any defect discovered during this period are corrected by the contractor without additional cost, provided they are covered under the contract. According to the literature, state that defect identified during the DLP must be rectified before the contractor is fully released from their construction obligation. Overall, the defect liability period is important because it ensures construction quality and protect the interest of building owner. That's all.
In Chapter 3, I will explain the methodology used for the case study. The first methodology used for the case study are literature review. For the case study for defect and defect liability period DLP, a literature review was carried out by gathering and analyzing information from academic journals, textbooks, construction contracts, government publications, and industry guidelines. The second methodology used for the case study are interview. Google Meet is used as a platform to interview the respondent by exchanging audio and self-camera to have a clear understanding on the information given. An interview was held with a construction quality assurance and quality control (QAQC) staff member to gain practical information. And now for background of interview. The interview was conducted with a quality assurance and quality control QAQC department staff of OIB Construction Company for the project of the Aman Resident, a high-rise residential development. The respondent has over 5 years of experience in ensuring that the construction works are completed according to the required quality standard, specification, drawing, and contract requirement while minimizing defect and rework. This respondent was selected to provide first-hand information on typical construction defects, procedures for dealing with defects during the defect liability period, and the difficulties faced by contractors in executing rectification works. For the interview, we have prepared a list of questions to be asked to the respondent. The total of questions is actually 24 questions, but for this presentation, I'm going to highlight 5 of them. The first one is about the construction site. The second one is about defect at site. The third one is causes of defects. The fourth one is defects liability period, DLP. What are them? And what is the process? The fifth one is contract administration and legal practice. The list of 5 questions and the answer, you can read it on the slide and understand it. Thank you.
with site project information. The case study for this report was conducted at the Aman Central, which is a high-rise residential development located at Alus Kedah. And the Aman residence falls into high-rise housing that consists of 3 buildings, Block A, Block B, and Block C. And expected contract cost is about 43 million ringgit. And during the interview, the project was still ongoing, and many processes are taking place, including tiling, waterproofing, painting, skin coating, defect detection, and rectification. And here are the most common defects found at the Aman. One of them is wall crack. Some crack will also cause when renovation works were carried out. especially when hacking or modification affect the water surface. Second is water leakage. Water leakage usually occur in wet areas and was related to waterproofing issues and usually identified through inspection, warning test, or report made after water leaking was detected. And next is DLP. With regard to the Aman, DLP is due to status as a high residential high-rise project that's multiple units. And common defect reported during the DLP stage at the Aman are wall crack, water leakage, settlement issues such as ground or floor movement. However, there are also challenges in managing DLP. The risks involved in leakage rectification work, especially when injection work are carried out, because usually when injection work uh, are ongoing, there are many risks that can lead to injuries of the workers. And lastly, its conclusion and recommendation. So in conclusion, this report highlight the issue of defects and DLP in construction with reference to the DMR resident. So according to our finding at the study, wall cracks, water leakage, and um, defect related to the sediment are the most common uh, defect that occurs at the AMA resident. So for our recommendation, waterproofing work should be carefully inspected and bonding tests should be conducted properly to ensure that the water areas such as toilet and bathrooms are free from leakage. Because um, according to the staff, waterproofing are one of the hardest defects to solve. So they should improve more on that. And since leakage may repair involve higher risk and more complicated replication work, uh, they should they should prepare more proper supervision and safety procedure during the repair activities. So that's the end of report 2. Thank you very much.